Vote. Santa Barbara City Council Finance Committee meeting for November 12th, 2013 will now come to order. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on topics within the jurisdiction of this committee but not on today's agenda? Seeing none, let us go to the first item.
Good afternoon.
Whomever.
Chair Francisco and committee members. My name is Jeannie Wilson, and I'm the Treasury Manager for the City of Santa Barbara. I will be presenting a discussion over revenues for the first quarter of 2014, and Julie Nemes, our Accounting Manager, will be discussing the expenditure activity for the first quarter of 2014. Overall, general fund revenues are trending as expected based on our analysis over a three-year average. In some cases, it's very difficult to analyze revenues this early in the year because some revenues are received in the later part of the year. They're not evenly distributed throughout the year. So we'll have a better idea of our revenues when we get to the mid-year time frame. Total general fund revenues for the first quarter are at $21.6 million. This represents about 19% of our budget estimates for the year. Again, this is consistent with our three-year average. Tax revenues are also trending according to our three-year average at about 17% for the quarter. Property taxes, as you'll see on the schedule, have not been received through September 30th. The first payments are generally received in October of each year. Both UUT and TOT are trending according to our budget estimates. In the other general fund revenue category, we're slightly above 25% at 27%. Fines and forfeitures and franchise fees are at 26 and 24% respectively. So we are trending as expected. The miscellaneous category, this category is primarily our overhead allocation for city administrative charges. That represents about $6 million of the $9 million in this category. And we do allocate those overhead cost recovery charges quarterly, so you will see that they trend at 25%. Overall, we're fine in this category as well. In the areas of fees and service charges, again, these are the various fees charged by city departments for services provided. These revenues are trending at just 24.6%. Park and revenue activity is slightly higher in the first quarter. This is due primarily as a result of the summer activities that they have and the increased participation of their programs through the summer months. The negative library variance is due to the timing of remittance from the county for services. We receive biannual payments from the county, and through the first quarter of this year, we haven't received those payments yet. Next, Julie Nemes will discuss the expenditure activities in the various funds.
Question, Mr. Chair?
Of course.
Ms. Wilson, so it looks like public safety is in the negative, if that's the right way to say it, and community development. Are we concerned about those departments?
Not at this time. What we do is we look at the activity for the first quarter, and some of that activity doesn't trend evenly. So we look at comparing it to the prior year, and then looking at through mid-year what we can expect to find. We're down slightly in public safety with parking citation revenues and dismissal fees, largely as a result of some decreased staffing. I don't know if the trend will continue through the mid-year, but that was primarily the reason for that decrease in the first quarter.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Francisco and committee members. I'm Julie Nemes. I'm the Accounting Manager for the Finance Department. As Jeannie mentioned, it is first quarter and it's a little early to make a lot of solid projections for the year, but I'm going to be talking about a lot of the major about the major variances that are happening both for the general fund expenditures and for the enterprise funds. So first, I'm going to be talking about general fund expenditures. First, I'm going to go over the adjusted annual budget, talk about this column. This is the budget for the year, plus any carryovers, any changes for the year. The year-to-date budget is actually seasonally adjusted based on a 3-year average. And then the variance without encumbrances. I'm not going to be touching on the variance with encumbrances because that also takes into consideration carryovers as well as open purchase orders that will be spent throughout the year. So it's not really a fair evaluation of the difference for the year to date as of September 30th. So there's really 3 variances that I'm going to focus on as of September 30th. The first one is city administrator. As of September 30th, city administrator is over budget by about $40,000. This is primarily due to about 98% of the non-contractual services budget was expended in the first quarter. This was to fund the South Coast Task Force on Youth Gangs MOU for fiscal year 14. So I know you're pretty familiar with that. So that all happened in the first quarter, and that's why there is a difference here. The second variance that I'm going to touch on is the fire department. It's about $310,000 over budget. This is similar to what we talked about last year for fiscal year 13. Mutual aid activities, again, this year were much higher than in prior years. The high fire season for the first quarter caused a lot higher mutual aid activities, and that's why it's over budget. But there's a corresponding increase in mutual aid revenues. So we're just going to continue, like we did last year, watch the mutual aid activities for the year, and at the end of the year, we'll probably come back to you with a recommended adjustment for both the mutual aid expenditures and the mutual aid revenues.
Is the revenue going to be equal to this?
It's actually above that. So
Okay.
there's currently right now what's projected is about $175,000 difference between the revenue and the expenditure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And the other variance I wanted to touch on was community development of about $527,000. It's actually expenditures came in under budget as of September 30th, what we would expect. This is pretty much due to a timing difference. In the prior years, the last couple prior years, about $335,000 was paid in the first quarter for the City Arts Advisory Program. This is what we pay to the Santa Barbara County Arts Commission. It's usually made in September. This year it was made in October. So it's just really a timing difference. Overall, it's about $500,000 under budget of what we would expect at September 30th. If there's any questions?
No.
Okay, great. I'll move on. I'm going to talk about the enterprise funds. Once again, I'm going to talk about these 3 columns. And there's about 3 variances I'd also like to touch on here. The first one is the water fund expenses. This is the most significant variance that we're seeing at September 30th. It's about $4 million under budget, and there's a couple reasons for this. The first one is there was about $1 million in temporary carryovers that we did not reverse until October. Basically, what that does is it increases the annual budget, which affects that difference, that year-to-date variance. Generally, those are reversed by September 30th. It didn't get reversed till October. So that's what caused about $1 million of the difference. Additionally, there was in the prior years, about 80% of the debt service transfers occurred in the first quarter in the last 2 years, in fiscal year 12 and fiscal year 13. Out of $1.8 million debt service transfers, $1.4 million occurred in the first quarter. And this year, only 1% occurred in the first quarter. So it's just a timing difference. It happened in October versus September.
Okay.
The next variance I wanted to talk about was the wastewater fund and expenses, about $627,000 under budget. This is also related to debt service, but there were no principal and interest debt payments in the first quarter. It's also a timing difference. Those are happening later in the year, and that also affected this difference.
Why did that change?
Last year, it's actually new debt this year. It's related to FOG and Headworks, 2 state loans that we didn't have last year.
Okay.
So it just increased the budget, which affected the percentage difference. And the third one I wanted to talk about was airport revenues. The revenues are slightly under budget. It's not real significant, about $44,000. This is primarily due to 2 property vacancies and also reduced parking revenues resulting from decreased passenger traffic during the first quarter. Airport does not think it's significant. They do think they're going to meet budget by year end. And, it is first quarter, so it's hard to really predict the year at this point. And it's a very slight difference if you look at it as a percentage of the budget overall. Any questions on enterprise funds?
No.
Okay, great. I'm going to move on to the proposed budget adjustments. The first proposed budget adjustment is for the library fund within the library department within the general fund. Since the budget adoption, the library received an additional grant in the amount of $2,500 from the Santa Barbara Foundation, and this is to purchase equipment to enable those who are visually impaired to scan and read materials at the library. So this entry will just increase estimated revenues and appropriations for that equipment. The next adjustment is actually, this is the first part of it. The second part will be on a later slide. The city allocation fund used to be, it is no longer in existence. It's been removed from the budget document, but it was used to account for central costs such as utilities and facilities maintenance of departments both in City Hall and at Garden Street. And beginning in fiscal year 14, we did remove this from the budget. Council approved the elimination of it. So this is just moving the remaining cash balance in the fund. The next proposed adjustment is the county library fund. Since budget adoption, the city of Solvang approved an additional contribution above what they originally approved of $74,000. They now approved $88,000. So this is just the difference of the $14,000, and this is going to be used for staffing at the Solvang library. So this will increase estimated revenues as well as the appropriations for the staffing at the Solvang library.
Is that going to change their hours of operation?
I don't believe so, no. I think it just adds additional staffing at they're consistent what they're already open for. They just add more staffing.
Okay.
These are for the streets fund. These are all different adjustments to their capital project budgets. I'll talk briefly about them. The first one is related to Highway 225. That's the Cliff Drive project. Since budget adoption, they did receive a contract with Caltrans for State Route 225. So this $819,000 will increase estimated revenues and appropriations for that contract. The remainder of those adjustments are the first one is a transfer between available appropriations in the Mission Creek Flood Control Project from the Drainage Improvement Project to the Mission Creek Flood Control Project. They identified additional needs in the Mission Creek Flood Control Project, and they had available appropriations in the Drainage Improvement Project. The other three changes, the $150,000, $50,000, and $107,000. In fiscal year 13, we sold property at Haley Street for about $335,000, and the proceeds from that sale were actually put in a special reserve to be used in the future for other projects. And these recommended entries will actually pull funds from those reserves, about $307,000, to cover the city's matching grant funds for these projects that are currently in the various phases of design and construction. The next one is the Street Grants Capital Fund. Since the adoption of the fiscal year 2014 budget, the Federal Highway Administration approved reimbursable design work for the 500 Street Bridge Replacement Project. And the participating costs are 100% reimbursable. So this will actually increase estimated revenues and appropriations for the Caltrans grant. This last one is the Facilities Capital Fund. The first part of this entry is what I talked about previously was the transfer from the fund balance from the City Hall allocation fund to the Facilities Capital Fund when we eliminated the City Hall allocation fund. The remainder are adjustment to capital project budgets within the Facilities Capital Fund. And these are several different adjustments that in fiscal year 14, it's the first year that they allocated adjustments, actually broke out the different projects within the facilities capital project budgets. So this year they actually identified different project needs within the facility capitals fund, and this is actually reallocating those funds among those budgets. I wasn't going to get into the details unless you had any specific questions on those. And that.
Ms. Nemes,
Sure.
The allocation fund that was eliminated, what was the purpose of that fund?
It was originally it did different maintenance costs, covered different maintenance needs for City Hall and for Garden Street. And so the fund it's actually going to be moved to the Facilities Capital Fund, I believe, to still do the same
to cover the same type of costs within the facility capital fund. Is that correct?
Bob Samario, Finance Director. We used to use this fund kind of like a mini
The allocation fund?
City Hall allocation fund as a mini internal service fund. It allowed us to capture certain costs like utilities and facilities costs for both this building and City Hall in one location, and then use an allocation method to allocate it to the various departments and programs rather than charge a utility bill directly to one, break it out into many, many parts. We just captured one place, and all those costs collectively would then be allocated under some method to the affected departments and programs. So it was just a convenience thing for us. But we've just basically decided we don't need that. We're going to do the same thing effectively in the facilities fund. So we're moving all those costs into facilities funds. They get allocated in sort of the same manner. And it just so happens that we had some money in that fund that was reserved for facilities improvements, or I think, for example, we had it at one point designated for the switch at City Hall, the telephone switch. But essentially it was for any facilities purpose. So we're just taking those reserves now that were in this old fund, bring it into the facilities fund, and they're going to be allocating it and using it at some point for some related purpose.
So do I understand that utility bills were paid out of the allocation fund?
We charge them to the allocation fund, and then, again, imagine one utility bill having to split that out into 100 different accounts.
Right.
We just charge it to one account in this fund, the City Hall allocation fund, along with other costs, and then we just allocated them in totality to the affected departments and programs. So it made it easier for us to allocate those central costs.
Yeah, that makes sense. So where will which fund will pay for the utility bills now?
It'll all be run through the facilities fund now. It'll be kind of a same concept. Those facilities costs are going to all be centralized now within the facilities fund, John Dewey's operation, and they'll just be allocated along with everything else that they do now for facilities maintenance, for example, which they're already doing. So it's just going to be sort of consolidated with their operating fund rather than having this unique fund just for City Hall and for Garden Street.
So, but is there an operating fund that's separate from this capital fund?
Yes, there is. Yeah, there is.
Okay.
Yeah, they have a facilities fund. It's 511. It's their facilities operation fund is in addition to the replacement fund. So they actually have two funds there related to facilities, operations and capital.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Any other questions? Is that it? In that case, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We are adjourned.